And this is our meeting to discuss the Greater Syracuse Land Bank annual report. We have Councilor Rudd here, Councilor Bay, Councilor Thompson, and Councilor Green, and myself, Councilor Allen. So Caitlin, when you get,
I'm sorry.
Yep, you're okay. When you get the chance, you can kind of give us an overview. You did pass out a few different papers, so if you can give an overview and then kind of go into the description of the papers. And she did tell me that Terry from her office made the map. I appreciate this, and it's a map from each district, so thank you. There you go, Pat.
Thank you for having us. You'll see on the...
I'll share.
Oh, yeah. You'll see on the front page of our annual report here that this is something that's required by the Land Bank Act for us to come once a year. Here he is. And for the chairman of the board, Vito Shosholi, to present an annual report to you in writing and orally, and then for you to have an opportunity to ask questions as well. We are supposed to report on the projects undertaken by the Land Bank during the past year, the monies expended by the Land Bank during the past year, and the administrative activities of the Land Bank during the past year. So I realize that this is kind of a thick report that we've sent you, and I don't necessarily want to rephrase all of it, but I'll hit the highlights for you. The Land Bank acquired 261 properties last year and sold 118. In addition, we completed about 35 demolitions and a number of renovations using grant funds, and all of those are detailed here in the report. As far as monies expended and our financial situation for the year, the Land Bank ran about a $1.1 million deficit in 2018. That's the biggest one that we have run to date. We're still on track with the projections we made, where if we continue deficit spending at this level, the Land Bank will run out of funding in the first quarter of 2021. So we have relied on financial assistance from the city and the county and the state so far to stay afloat. We made about $1 million of sales revenue just from selling real estate, and that supports a large chunk of our operations, but it costs a little bit over $2 million to actually run the day-to-day operations of the Land Bank. So we are continuing to look for financial support for those activities. Typically, demolitions and renovations are easily funded by grant funds. These grant funders, whether they're the state or the city level, they want to fund a certain number of deliverables over the course of a grant period. So we get paid to do X number of demos, X number of rehabs, X number of new construction, and we work with home headquarters on the rehabs and the new construction piece. But there's not a lot of direct funding for the line items that are really driving our operating deficit. That is lawn mowing, trash pickup, snow shoveling, liability insurance on the properties. That sort of thing is really driving the deficit.
Are those services included in the $2 million?
Yes.
Okay.
That $2 million number is really just kind of the cost of operating the Land Bank. It does not include the cost of doing demos and rehabs and things of that nature. That wildly fluctuates year to year depending on what grant funds are available. So we did so few demolitions last year because there was only that much demo funding available. So that can swing a couple $1 million one way or the other depending on what grants are available in that given year. And then as far as administrative activities go, we haven't really had a great deal of, thank you, haven't had a great deal of structural change this past year. Over the past several years, we've worked on bringing a lot of activities in-house that have saved us considerably. We brought sales in-house, and that cut a couple $100,000 of what we would have paid out in real estate commissions. And our state delegation has also been really helpful in amending the Land Bank Act in ways that cut our expenses. So early on, Assemblyman Magnarelli and Senator Valesky sponsored legislation to make us exempt from deed recording charges, from sewer unit charges. We are now exempt from property taxes immediately upon acquisition. It used to be that there was some lag time there. So when you add all that up, over the past 6 years that the Land Bank's been operating, they've helped us trim about $1 million of expense that we otherwise would have incurred. Now we're really focusing on, you've helped us trim the expenses, but we need a secure revenue source, because like I said, if we don't secure some recurring source of funding, then the land bank will deplete its fund balance by the first quarter of 2021. And there seems to be some appetite for that at the state level and at the county level, helping us to recur that source of, or to obtain that recurring source of operating revenue that would make sure that we don't run out of funds at the beginning of 2021. And I guess the elephant in the room is, if that occurs, we currently have an inventory of about 1,000 properties. If the land bank runs out of capital, then the city and the county are going to need to figure out how to maintain those properties and mow the lawns and pick up the trash and all of those things. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
So, excuse me, did you say that there's a appetite to do that, to defund?
To provide funding.
Provide funding, okay.
Yeah. And then other administrative activities.
Not given any cash.
Right, right. Yeah, much more rosy picture than that. And then the other big item that we've been working on as far as administrative activities go is a strategy to deal with brownfields. For the past 6 years, the city has been working on foreclosing on this backlog of foreclosures. They'll send us a list saying, here's the next couple hundred properties that are going to go in phase 10, phase 11, et cetera, and would you please review them? We have tried to take almost everything that the city is willing to convey to us, because we know that we have this codependent relationship with tax collections. And so if we are willing to take stuff, then the city can send out foreclosure notices and not be crying wolf, and it's really helped the city's collection rate significantly improve. So we don't want to be picky and start excluding the properties that are in bad condition, otherwise it would start to undermine that collection improvement. But we have rejected things that we suspect to be brownfields, and we've been aware for a while that we need a better strategy on how to deal with those. And so we've been working with the city and the county to emulate something that was done in Suffolk County. Their county is the only foreclosing governmental entity there. So the county, the land bank, and the DEC entered into a memorandum of understanding where the DEC said normally the county would be hesitant to enter the chain of title and wouldn't want to own these brownfields even for a second. The land bank was also avoiding taking title, and the DEC acknowledged that, you know, the whole purpose of foreclosing and conveying property to the land bank is so that you can get it into the hands of a responsible developer that you've vetted, get it cleaned up, get it back on the tax rolls. And so the DEC has offered indemnification and a covenant not to sue to the land bank and to the county in that case. So here we've been talking with our DEC region about offering that same indemnification to the city, the county, and the land bank so that we could start moving some of these properties through and getting them cleaned up. We haven't even really been able to get access to the properties to step foot on them and do testing, and this would really solve that problem. The other reason why we're better able to deal with brownfields now is that land banks recently got the ability to create single asset LLCs. Other public authorities can't do that, cities and counties can't do that, but if we have a potentially contaminated site that we know we want to control, but we don't necessarily want to put the rest of the land bank's assets at risk, we can put it into a single asset LLC and then still work on getting it tested, cleaned up, and redeveloped. So we're really optimistic about the way that that will hopefully move forward, and hopefully I'll be sharing with you very soon. We just got back a phase 1 evaluation on 900 South Ave. You may be familiar with it. It's a old gas station. If you're driving south on South Ave, it's just before you cross over Onondaga Park there. It's been tax delinquent for many, many years. The owner, I believe, is deceased, and the city was able to get access to that property using an inspection warrant that they got through the court system, and the land bank went and applied for a grant from the EPA for some technical assistance. And so with the city getting access and us bringing these consultants in that were paid for by the EPA, they've completed their phase 1, and hopefully we'll be doing a phase 2 evaluation soon. So that would be a great pilot project for us as far as these brownfields are concerned, because I know it's been a real big priority for the neighborhood, and it was identified as a priority site in the South Ave Economic Development Corridor study that the city did last year. Anything else you want?
Questions?
Any questions? Go ahead.
So one of the things I know I talked about last time is that you guys don't necessarily list all the properties that you have, and one of the my basic understanding of it is that by trying to kind of restrict the supply of what's available in the market in particular neighborhoods, that can help the price, right? Is that generally?
That's the strategy, yep.
And I guess the biggest issue I have with that is, you know, if you're looking to invest in the neighborhood, you live in that neighborhood, you're not fooling anyone that the supply outstrips the demand there, and people know that. And the reality is, like, while we might be able to push up the price of housing for the inventory that you guys have, if you're someone that lives next to a house that's vacant, that you guys have your sign up, that's not even being marketed, you're driving down the value of that property, right? And I think that it might be a little bit unfair to the other private property owners that the land bank is holding on to these properties to kind of inflate the value of its inventory.
Well, that's not to say that we wouldn't list a house in that situation. So we have signs on probably 500 buildings right now, 250 of which are demolition candidates, the others that are, good renovation candidates that just haven't been listed yet. And we get phone calls all the time asking about, hey, what's the deal with 123 Main Street? I see your sign on it, but there's not a for sale sign. And that prompts us to get it listed sooner rather than later, knowing that there is interest. And we get feedback from the neighbors too, that they might not even necessarily be interested in buying it, but they are eager for us to get it listed sooner rather than later. So all of that does really drive our decision making about what gets listed when. And if there is demand for a property that we don't have listed, as soon as that's brought to our attention, that's something that we work on, is getting it cleaned out and getting it listed.
I would just say, in my opinion, from a transparency perspective, I would like to see all of them listed, that it's being marketed, and that, if it's the case that there's not a demand for it, then it'll sit out there, and I understand that, but I would like to see the effort made, is my opinion.
I really think, I agree with you. In an ideal world, I would prefer to see the same thing. But there's also some constraints on how many properties we can get listed at once. We typically spend between $1,500 and $3,500 cleaning each house out before we can even draft the renovation specs. And there's staff time involved in drafting those specs, and then there's staff time involved in the showings. So there is a little bit of a bottleneck there. And if you're talking about our operating deficit, where we lost $1.1 million last year, if we took all 190 of those properties and cleaned them out tomorrow, it would cost a small fortune.
Why can't you just post them and put on all the parts that the information you're describing, NA, TBD, TBD, something. Just get it listed so that you can see online that the property is here.
I mean, there is a list that, these are just logistical things, really. There is a list on our website of all of the properties that we own, so people can see what is a possibility that they could call us about. If we wanted to publish all of them, so we have a database that we manage all of our listings on, and when you hit publish, it goes live on the public listings side. We could publish them all tomorrow, and I'm just afraid that it would overwhelm buyers who want to go find one that's already cleaned out, that has the specs drafted. Now they're going to have to comb through page after page of properties to find the ones that are prepped versus the ones that aren't prepped. I'd have to spend some time thinking about how we could do that in a way that wouldn't be inconvenient for people.
I don't know, the way you just described the buyer, that sounds like somebody sitting in like Long Island looking with an expectation, whereas like I think locally you wouldn't look, oh, I wonder if it's been cleaned out. I wonder if there's one in my neighborhood. I wonder if there's one within 3 blocks. I wonder. So the map on the website seems a critical point for it to be, because the list is inconvenient, which is exactly why real estate agents have these maps.
Right.
So you can see, oh, wow, there's this many here, and you zoom in, and you're like, oh, there's one here, there's one there. Oh, this one's near me. What's that one? Oh, yeah, I know that one.
Yeah.
And it makes it easy to see what's available. And that's what's not happening now, because you can't easily see the entire inventory.
We should spend some time playing with the database and see if there's a way we could do that that would be convenient for people. Which, real quick, I want to make a plug for something before I forget. You'll all be getting an email very soon from me. We've invited Center for Community Progress to come on April 30th. They'll be in town leading an all-day workshop for our board members and also for community stakeholders. They're a nationwide nonprofit that provides technical assistance to land banks and city governments and municipal entities that are dealing with blighted and abandoned properties. They're kind of the experts on abandoned houses. And so we've asked them to come help us do this kind of all-day visioning session. The land bank's been operating for 6 years, and I think this is a great time to start asking some of these questions about, well, just because we've been doing it this way, maybe we could do it differently, and we just haven't thought about it. And so they're going to be sending out electronic surveys to all of you. If you can participate in that and answer their questions in advance, I think that'll really help them craft a day full of sessions that'll be really meaningful, and we'll get a lot of good discussion and feedback out of it. So please watch for an email from me and then also from Center for Community Progress, and mark your calendars for April 30th. We'll be serving, we'll have our board members in the morning and then invite everybody in and have lunch and then a couple hours of sessions in the afternoon.
Thank you. Council Bay.
Thank you. Hello again. I want to start by, just to maybe lighten the mood a little bit, maybe the mood that I'll create in a few minutes. I want to point out some positives, right? I certainly applaud them. 17% decrease in vacant residentials, which I think stands to be mentioned. 14.4 million of overdue revenue. Sale of 651 properties in the city, attracting 21 million, most of which I assume, 21 million in investment, which I assume most of it is in the city. So, I think it's worthwhile and certainly fair to applaud that. But
I knew that was coming.
maybe alongside that, some concerns, and one specific concern that I've had since the beginning. And I start by saying what I've always said. I always say that, government is kind of, it's a live animal that we're trying to figure out how, and so there will always be things that may not work out exactly the way we planned. Prelude, call that the mattress or the trampoline jump. I don't know. But I want to just maybe mention a couple of things, and I understand the point about what the city would have to do in terms of grass cutting and picking up trash. Problem is, though, Caitlin, a lot of them, the grass is not cut and the trash isn't picked up, and I see them every day. But I think that's not a blame to say that the effort isn't there, but it speaks to my initial concern years ago when the enabling legislation came. This is a repeat song and dance for y'all, and I held it up for 3 months out of concern that the collection of properties would outpace the ability to not only maintain them but even sell them. And I think Councilor Hogan remembers that it was held up for 3 months out of concern that they would kind of be hoarded and we wouldn't be able to unload them fast enough. That, from what I understand, that problem still exists now. And if you remember, Councilor Kessner, I think 2 years ago, held up sales out of that same concern then. That's one of those things that we try, we mentioned with hopes that it would get better. I don't think there's really a magic pill for that one. I do want to mention, though, a concern about what's being communicated as maybe too much. And I mean, we know developers or contractors or whoever, they have a lot of complaints. But you have some that's very capable persons who've done business with the city for a long time who are saying they will not go back because it's too much red tape. And that, it's very tough to determine the true scope of work. We know that from the initial scope of work, so sometimes you're going to end up with more costs associated with a project. We get that. But you have people who have made the complaint that the cost is outpaced in the value.
Yeah.
Right? And so for that reason, they won't go back and purchase anymore. And these are actually the people we need to, because they have the capability of doing the work.
I mean, as far as the cost of the renovation outpacing the value, that's a struggle that we're kind of bumping our heads against every day. And when we do these projects with home headquarters that are subsidized renovations, we're able to compensate for that. So it might cost them $200,000 to rehab a house, and then we're able to sell it to a first-time home buyer for $90,000. Well, we've got $110,000 worth of grant funds to fill that gap. The private developers that we sell to don't have that luxury. And so I am really conscious of the fact that they're running into those kinds of problems. We're trying, it's a constant balancing act, I think you get it. So when we draft these specs, we want to make sure that they're drafted in a way that really beautifies the surrounding neighborhood. We want the neighbors to see that there's investment happening there, and if they get excited about it, then maybe they'll go paint their house the next year. Now, on the flip side, most of the landlords that we sell to and investors that we sell to want to put more money onto the inside of the house and not so much onto the exterior. So we're trying to walk that line of saying, well, maybe you could just power wash this house and not necessarily have to do new siding. But we're also trying to push them to a higher standard because we want people to see that there are good things happening in the neighborhood. But if we push too far, then are we asking them to invest more than the house is going to be worth? It's a constant struggle.
Brings me to my bigger problem. Now this one is certainly a repeat song and dance because I've been saying it since the council has changed its look 3 times since this conversation has started. And I think this is a matter of philosophy. I'm going to coin a new term, if it's not in existence already, and I'm going to call it fiscal negligence. But I'm going to blame it on the city first. And this is related to how we make use of vacant lots. And many of you know I've made this argument, not only to the land bank, but primarily to MBD and others, that we have to be a little bit more creative. And I think I have to give consideration to the value of the asset and when you're selling it all for side yards, especially if it's buildable, as opposed to marketing it for some development, which is to our benefit, and by our, I mean taxpayers. Mm-hmm. For that to not receive adequate consideration, I think is negligent and irresponsible on the part of all of us. And while we know, we try things, we test them out to see if they work, we've already validated the fact that, I think 1,000 times over, that there's a greater benefit with development than it is for a side lot that may generate anywhere from, I don't know, 300 to 500 a year, as opposed to a few thousand a year. I don't know how we haven't, in all this time that we've been discussing it, give real consideration to a better plan in that respect. And we may have, but we haven't heard it yet, so I'm going to stick to that argument. And I'm not just putting it on you, but I'm just putting it out there. Let me finish this last statement. I think it's a matter of philosophy, and there needs to be a more cohesive one between the land bank, the city, and the council on what we do with vacant lots. Yeah. There's one next to me that Home Headquarters tried to buy, that they won't sell, that always have overgrowth,
Oh, privately owned.
Yeah, privately owned, but it's an example of what I'm talking about, because as a counselor, I get the conversation from everybody else on the block outside of the owners who say, well, what are you going to do with that lot? Well, I don't own it, they do, they sold it to them. And this is the kind of, this is one of many, not to mention the 2 vacant lots owned by the church across the street that's done nothing but overgrown and for the past, I don't know, 10 years. So, I just think we can do better in that respect, and I'm going to wind down because I got to leave in a minute, meet with you.
I'm hoping we can discuss a lot of that on April 30th, because I do agree that maybe there needs to be more communal brainstorming to get everybody thinking about it in the same way. And I'm hoping that they'll be able to help us do some of that.
We have to, because otherwise we're pulling hat tricks all the time to try to generate revenue.
Right.
Instead of really trying to shore up what is our normal brick and mortar process of government generating revenue. And I hate to sound like a record broken in 1,000 pieces, because I've said this probably every year. Vito, I know you're getting tired of hearing me say it.
I don't want
I
to.
agree with you.
I don't want to spill the beans either, but I know that Stephanie's office is working on a strategy right now for a big infill construction project, and she's reached out and asked, how many buildable lots do you have? And I say, as many as you want. So I'm excited to work with them on that, and I think it's going to be a really good opportunity.
All right, that's all I got.
Well, Councilor Bates stole my question. I have it written down here along with names, Home Headquarters, Stephanie, the I-team. Like, if you guys could kind of collaborate, and come up with a plan.
Invite the I-team to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they do. You got a whole team downstairs. Like,
You were too nice.
let's create some new ideas. Did anyone else have any questions?
I do.
You do? Okay.
On the pie chart, I don't understand some of the categories. Like, you've got, I get listed structures, so the second page.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got under contract, I get that. You've got structures sold, but like the lots sold post-demo, lots sold vacant, lots demolished.
Yeah,
Those are very hard to understand what the difference is and what it means.
I wanted to differentiate between, if a lot comes into the land bank and it's already a lot and all we do is mow it and turn around and sell it to somebody, then that really didn't take much work on our part, but we were able to get it back on the tax rolls, versus a property that maybe came into our inventory as a deteriorated building that we've demolished and then sold as a vacant lot. And so there's a lot of overlap there where we try to say, how many properties have we addressed? Well, we've sold so many and we've demoed so many, but in fact, there's a little bit of an overlap between the two. And so I was really just trying to break this out into the most fine-grained level of detail possible. Usually when I'm presenting these statistics, I have it aggregated a little bit higher level. So vacant lots, already vacant at acquisition, those are lots that we own that we never demoed anything on. Vacant lots demolished post-acquisition, we still own those, but it's a lot now because we demoed something there. Versus lots sold post-demo, where we've completed a demolition and sold it, or lots sold would be, it came in as a lot, it went out as a lot. Maybe I'm just providing too much detail here, sorry.
No, I
Well,
like the
maybe it
detail.
would just, if there was maybe if you put in a legend with
Okay.
slightly more detail.
So this is, before you go on to your next question, so when I'm looking at this chart, so structures sold, we have 504. And all of the smaller ones broken down, you have them broken down here on the chart, but if you add all of them together, the 265 for vacant lot, the orange one, and then 190, and then 88, and then 79, those add up to 622. So you really have 622 vacant lots, right?
No, some of those are sold and some of those we still own. So if it says
So not sold or owned, but just altogether, it's like 622 vacant lots, right?
that we've owned at some point in time.
Right, and
Yep.
so, but structures sold, we have 504. So we have more vacant lots than we have structures sold. Because you got 622 vacant lots.
I mean, I would kind of keep them in separate categories. So if we're looking at properties that have sold, the majority have been structures. If we're looking at all the properties we've ever acquired, the majority have been structures.
And then if you add, so then you have the demo candidates. So if you have the demo ones, these will eventually become vacant lots, right? And that's 251. So altogether, we'll have 873 altogether that are vacant. But we've only sold 504 structures. So what I'm saying is, like, we have more vacant than we have sold, and that's the thing that I don't like.
Well, this doesn't give you the whole picture either, because some of these vacant lots have been sold and then built on. So I would more likely look at what's the post-purchase use. I have
Okay.
tables on that too, and I'll get you
Okay.
that data. It's a little misleading.
In general, the board has always seen as a threat the issue of carrying a high inventory of vacant lots without the ability to pay the operating expenses that occur with them, and such as keeping them clean of debris to the extent that we do that in an adequate job and plow the sidewalks even if there's nobody there, they still have to be shoveled. So, but that's a big concern of us, is that our business model, there's no revenue stream. If we can't sell them and we're holding them in inventory, it's a major issue. And we've looked at some ideas regarding land bank, but if they don't have a business, it doesn't have a business model behind it. There's just no way of incurring land trust, correct, which does exist, but there's no real business model to that, short of other transfer payments from government, which is why I think we advocate for really the state stepping up to the plate here, whether it's giving us the ability to raise an independent revenue stream from another taxing source, which nobody will want to talk about in this environment, or just simple transfer and funding directly land banks, which is is being contemplated presently by the state. I think it's a very modest amount given the issues that we face across the state with all the land banks, but it's still there's something they're considering, and that's probably the proper governmental entity to deal with this issue. So, but it was a major, that and demolitions have always been major threats to the land bank with respect to sustaining operations.
But I think a lot of people, well, at least I understand that the banking land into the land bank is a threat to the land bank, ironically, because it's a losing business, but that's what we're charging you with. So that's why you need the revenue source in order to actually maintain the land that we're banking with you, because nobody else will care for it.
That's correct.
So
That's exactly why we need an ample revenue source that's routine.
So some of this aspirationally, like when I do think a minimum, the listing properties would be great, and I think that if you have it coded in a way that these things can be shown easily, like you give this map of the whole city with the properties sold, I could imagine it just easily being tied to these like categorical things of, oh, there's 1,600 properties, and you could say I want to see the ones that were structures sold. Like I imagine it probably wouldn't take tons of work, but it may be far too much work for what
I think there's
we have.
probably a way to do that. So I'll continue to brainstorm that and work on it with our data whiz here, Terry. But if you have specific thoughts afterwards, you want to follow up, certainly just shoot me an email and we'll work on it.
So again, the big picture, so in the initial, you say you started with backlog of 4,000 seizable assets, seizable properties, and we've done 1,600, so we're not even halfway through. What was the backlog? I'm just asking, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, don't overreact to that so badly. We expected that half of those people would pay and avoid foreclosure.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's happening, and that's good. So we definitely didn't want to foreclose on all 4,000.
Okay. And then you have the number of demo candidates as 251, but then later in the report, you have this stat that says 57% of.
Because you wrote on it. Go to the next page. Is that what you did?
Yeah. So you said 57% of your inventory.
What page?
All right, you see an inconsistency.
You said it on page 6,
Okay.
but then if it seems like I had you estimated at 570 demo candidates based on that, so something is like, it's hard to tell. So
Yeah, just
I wouldn't disagree with you have 570 demo candidates, but
there's something's wrong there. I'll take another look at that. Oh, 57% of our structures,
structure.
not 57% of the
I see.
properties.
Okay. Because the demo candidates too, that becomes a logical thing for not listing.
Right.
Like if you very clearly said, we have this many properties, this many are demo candidates, then it would make sense that those are not listed,
And I
but
think-
that the rest should be listed.
Right.
So the idea that you have saleable, like renovation candidates that are not listed, that seems the greatest travesty.
Right. And I think over time you're probably going to see that percentage go up because we're selling the good stuff, and we're not raising demo money as fast. So.
Are
Yeah.
there properties that you feel there's a market for, but our zoning code restricts the desire for investment?
Yes, and I actually think that this is really good timing that the city's working on rewriting the zoning code while we're doing this exercise, because every now and then I will reach out to Owen Kearney and say, hey, we've got this apartment building that was built in the 1920s. The current zoning doesn't really allow for it to be reused. Would you consider taking another look at the map? Because I know they're currently drafting the new map. And he's been really receptive to that kind of thing.
Is there like an overall like point that like typically comes up a lot, or is it case by case?
Well, the biggest issue for us is multifamily housing that is in zoning districts that don't allow that level of density. So we have a lot of two families that are in single family zoning districts, and they never got a proper use variance. And so if they're empty for 2 years, they lose their grandfathering. So we would either have to then come get a use variance or force our buyers to convert it back to a 1. Same thing with 3 families that are in zoning districts that only allow 2s. And so what we try to do is respect the way the house was originally built. So we get a lot of 2 families where people will take that upper floor and divide it into 2 units. Well, each of those upstairs units now only has 1 means of egress, and that is a fire code violation. So in that case, we will make them convert it back to a 2. It was originally built as a 2, and we might have to go get a use variance for that if it's in a single family zoning district. But so we're trying to do what's the most logical, and what's most logical isn't always the highest number of units. It's, you know, what's the best, most marketable layout that's going to comply with building code and fire code, and then we go beg for variances accordingly.
So it would just be somewhat ironic if there's a block that has a lot of vacant structures, that there's demand for there to be a 2 unit, so there'd be 2 families living there, and instead, because of our restrictions of zoning, now there's no families living there, and it perpetuates the problem.
I suspect that some of the properties that are coming to us because they're illegal land uses. I think that people get really fed up with the process of having to get the variances and the appropriate permits, and they give up and stop paying their taxes, and then it comes to us. We had a property the other day that our board voted on that is a commercial property, a little one-story retail operation. Commercial property in a 2-family zoning district. Half of the building is actually encroaching into the right-of-way, but it never had an encroachment. And so it's an illegal land use, and then the encroachment. And then at one point, it was owned by the same person that owned the single-family house next door. So that single-family house has a water service and a water meter. They never did a separate service for the commercial building. They just ran a line out the house into the commercial building next door. there's no way we're going to be able to sell that. And so that's one that we're going to demolish and then merge the lot with the house next door. And it's a predominantly residential neighborhood. So I think that when all is said and done, nobody's going to ever notice that there was a little store there. But yeah, I think that buildings that are weird like that, people walk away from because they don't know how to make them legal.
Any further questions?
It does still sound crazy that you're gonna demo it because we can't run like a new water line. I mean, I get this cost and
Well,
and
it's-
separating it. It's probably a
Yeah.
All right,
It's
all right,
another
all
one
right.
where probably the cost of, even if all those problems didn't exist, the cost of the rehab would still exceed the value of the finished product.
What's your expectation this year from the AG's office?
We were awarded a $2 million grant in the fall, and that will fund $1.4 million worth of demolitions and $600,000 worth of rehabs. We've already lined up all of those renovation candidates, and they're listed here on page 6 of this report. So Home Headquarters has already started on some of those. And this is the first time, usually these AG grants are in 2-year cycles, and this is the first time they've said to us that you can, if you finish all your deliverables early, you can come back and apply for more. So we're trying to hit the ground running and spend all of that money in 2019 so that we can go back at the end of the year and apply for more funding. They haven't said how much additional funding will be available, but we figured it's worth trying.
Thank you.
How many million? 1 point.
1 point.
2 million total. 1.4 is going to fund 56 demos, and 600,000 will fund 8 rehabs.
And this year, how many demos did we end up doing?
We only did 35 in 2018, but your fiscal year is different than ours. So our contract with you right now from June 30th, yeah, we have to do 45 during your fiscal year, and we're on track to meet that goal. Your contract also required that we take your $500,000 and match it, and we're on track to do that as well. We're hustling to spend all that money by June 30th.
So it's like 26,000 per demo is the budget kind of thing.
Yeah, and if we come in a little bit lower than that, then we can do more, but we have to do at least 56.
Said you listed them, but the list on page 6 is the renovations, and then it just describes the money, but there's no list of demolitions that I see.
We did not list the demolitions. We only listed the rehabs.
Are they
So I emailed the
identified already, or are they?
Yeah, I recently emailed a spreadsheet to the council of properties that we've flagged for 2019 demos. We have money to do at least 56. We've identified, I think, 51 candidates, and so there's a little bit, we're leaving a few spots open. Usually what happens over the course of the year is a building will catch fire, or we'll get a property that the city's very recently foreclosed on that has a collapsed foundation, and so they kind of jump to the top of the list. But that said, I am looking for your feedback. If there are properties in your districts that you think we aren't addressing that we should address, please let us know. There's still some time to shuffle.
Do you have partnerships? I think you do, but partnerships with the vacant lot. What's like the 800? Do you have programs where the philanthropies help pay for investments in the lot to make it so?
So a lot of people will lease lots from us for community gardens, and then they go apply for grants from the Parks Conservancy. Is that the kind of thing you're?
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But is there anything that's not through the Parks Conservancy that's for lot redevelopment?
There's a grant through the Gifford Foundation that's a small grant, and I forget what it's called. It's the What If grants, thank you. Some of our community gardens have applied for those as well. Those philanthropies are usually willing to fund projects like that if the land bank is the owner and we're a 501c3, so we can be the fiscal sponsor for the grant. If somebody's, say, buying a side lot and wants to put in a driveway and it's going to be a privately owned thing, then that wouldn't, yeah, that wouldn't work. They couldn't get funding for that sort of thing.
Okay, and just in closing, I know we talked about this last time, but is it possible for you to continue to update us throughout the year? I don't know if you want to do it like quarterly, just so we know exactly what you guys are doing, so we don't have to wait a whole year to find out like the hardcore numbers. And then also when you do get together with Home Headquarters and I believe Stephanie's office as far as coming up with a plan for the vacant lots, I would like to be included in that because as you know, that's one of my biggest pet peeves. And especially in the 4th District, I have a lot of vacant lots that I'm just personally tired of looking at, and I would like to see something there. But I do understand the restrictions that you guys have, but I don't want to just every time like jump down your throat about it. I would like to be a part of the discussion so we can all try to make it better.
Absolutely.
And if you wanted to just give a closure and a recap of everything, and then we can end.
Sure, thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to come here today and talk about what we've been doing. Just to kind of reiterate, we share your goal of wanting to see more infill construction in these neighborhoods, and we'll definitely include you in conversations going forward about how we can make some of that happen. And I hope that all of you will come on the afternoon of April 30th and join us for a bigger brainstorming session about, how should the land bank maybe change and evolve over the next few years. I'd really appreciate that participation. One of the things that came up today that has come up a lot over the years is this idea of, should the city continue to foreclose on properties and convey them to the land bank, even if there's not that much immediate demand for them right now? So do we have more going in than is going out? And we did outline a few points on pages 8 and, well, I think it's really all on page 8 of this report, about why we think that in some cases that makes sense. So even though we have properties that aren't being sold immediately, the fact that we own all these demolition candidates and have title to them means that we have shovel-ready projects that's enabled us to bring home more Attorney General grant funds than any other land bank in the state, because they know that when they grant us funds, we can start producing deliverables immediately. We have partnerships with codes and with the police and the fire department, and they would seem to prefer that the properties be owned by the land bank as opposed to just sitting on the seizable list, because now there's a local property owner that they can interact with that can respond to their concerns. So we've outlined a lot of that on page 8, and I do encourage you to take a look at it. But I may have said this to some of you before, but you should really think of yourselves as majority shareholders in the land bank. You created the land bank. We rely on you for funding. We rely on you for a stream of properties. And we do want to be responsive to what your concerns are. And so please never hesitate to call, email, let me know what's going on and what you want to see done differently.
So just one more on this point about the mapping and the power of having all the 1,600 properties that you've ever touched somehow plotted onto the map. For instance, I think it would help with neighborhood plans, even just thinking about like Syracuse Housing Authority and the properties that are beyond the Syracuse Housing Authority footprint, but that there are land bank properties right adjacent to there, and having them tagged for some, like, oh, this is immediately next door to this thing where all this other stuff is happening. And a citizen could do that if it were all plotted, right? You could just zoom in and say, oh, which are the lots, which are the buildings, what's the status of the things within a half mile of that zone. And we can't really do that right now.
We're actually getting ready to do that around the housing.
I would hope, because I went on the tour with Bill Simmons and I said, like, do you know?
No, not in conjunction with Bill, but I'm just saying we're actually getting ready to do that. So I'm just saying, like, what you're saying.
The city?
Me as a 4th District counselor.
Oh, like,
and then with Stephanie in home headquarters and Caitlin, once we all.
But imagine how much easier it would be if, like, they were just on there.
So.
Yeah, that's the purpose of it.
Now you've got me. I'm going to turn into a data nerd for a second.
Every land bank house around that to get rid of things developed.
Yeah.
There's obviously a spreadsheet behind this pie chart. We could very easily take that and geocode it in a Google map, and you could see it tomorrow color-coded this way. So
great, do it tomorrow.
We'll get working on that. We'll have to, periodically update it. It's a static thing, so it's not tied to our database. But I think people could see what's been sold next to them, and that's a powerful thing that a lot of people are not recognizing.
More than what's been sold. All 1,600.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right. I guess that concludes this. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yep.